Good afternoon and welcome to a special Zoom webinar with Sealaska. I'd like to introduce our President and CEO, Anthony Malott.
Thank you, Dixie. And thank you to all the shareholders who are joining us today in this important conversation. We will have a good mix of speakers today and a slide deck that I believe Dixie will start sharing that just highlights the agenda, the list of our speakers, and gives a sense of what we will be discussing, which, in the breadth of the agenda items, it's more than just a lineal descent conversation in terms of shareholder eligibility. We want to provide a breadth of information that ties to general shareholder eligibility just for informational purposes. And so we have individuals from our shareholder relations team. If we go back to the previous slide, Dixie, I'll just walk through myself as the intro. We'll get a great intro from Joe Nelson, our board chair. Again, we have shareholder relations team members on, Shyla and Vanessa, who will talk about enrollment requirements and eligibility as it currently stands. And with special focus on kind of the Class D descendant shares. And we're lucky to have Penny Gage, who is on our shareholder participation committee as the chair of Other Alaska. And she will just be running us through current shareholder perspectives on blood quantum, because the real story we want to present is that Sealaska is putting this conversation out there because it's been a conversation that we've heard consistently from our shareholders for decades. If you think of ANCSA itself, originally requiring a quarter blood quantum, the conversations around that quarter blood quantum in differentiation to lineal descent has been going on from the very beginning of ANCSA, all the way back to the late 60s and early 70s as ANCSA was being stood up. This conversation has been part of our history. And the one additional thing I want to point out is that ANCSA, as we all know, was not perfect from the beginning. There were voices, there were philosophies, there was positions from the federal government, from the state, from different Native corps that all created ANCSA at a moment in time. And over the years, many have pointed out the flaws in the system. But the one powerful process we have is that when we see a real flaw, we have the ability through Congress and through a collective shareholder and Alaska Native Corporation voice to address those flaws, to address concerns and improve the entire structure of ANCSA. And we've been doing that since day one. We, not just Sealaska has led many of these efforts, but the Alaska Native Corps and all the over 100,000 shareholders that encompass the Alaska Native Corps have asked for and led improvements in the entire structure. And whenever Sealaska has been involved in those improvements, and they have been numerous, our board, previous boards, and many voices of our shareholders start with the philosophy that Sealaska forever wants to be known as a Native corporation. A Native corporation as a concept is a distinct difference from your average for-profit corporation. And we are going to make decisions that are different than your average for-profit corporation. And that is following the philosophy of always being known as a native corporation, being led by our native values, and listening to our shareholders. And that is how we're kicking off this discussion. And before I pass it over to Joe, I'd ask Dixie to start sharing a interesting conversation from back in the 2000s. And I share these because we want to highlight again that this conversation has already been occurring. The quotes that you see on this page come from 2004, when we talked, in this instance, it comes from the actual descendant shareholders who would become eligible if the Class D descendant shares were passed by shareholder voice, shareholder vote. And it was passed. So these descendants have become shareholders, but this gives us a glimpse of the conversation that we needed to hear at that point in time, we being Sealaska, we being our shareholders, in regard to making this very important decision. And I'll start with the main reason why these descendants were so passionately for, those that were passionately for the creation of the Class D descendant stock. It was about connectedness. It was about being involved, having an obligation and a responsibility through share ownership to give back to our people, to give back to the company, give back to our communities. And they strongly believe that. If you look at the first two quotes on this, it just gives you a sense that inclusion through share ownership offered more voices to be part of the corporation that would strengthen us. The first quote highlights a whole new pool of leadership that Sealaska would get from creating the Class D descendant stocks. The second quote just offers that glimpse of the could be, what could happen. You know, just having Class D gives some young kid, a youth, the motive, the inspiration to look to be a director at some point in time. And they recognize that as these descendants were having this conversation, they knew they were the future, but there were those younger than themselves that also could lead. But those were the passionate fours. They also had concerns. And this is what we really want to get to through this whole process. It's not just the passion around why moving towards lineal descent makes sense. It's addressing the concerns that our shareholders have. And even as a descendant who would benefit from Class D, they had concerns. They mentioned, I'm less concerned about diluting our dividends than giving shares to a shareholder who is less involved with the corporation. There was a concern or a perceived risk that more shareholders through Class D might be given shares who weren't involved in the corporation. That's a concern that we have been addressing, we Sealaska, from the point of time that Class D was put forward. We've been addressing it by reaching out to our Class D descendant shareholders, connecting them with SHI, connecting them to cultural programs, expanding our scholarship program, expanding our internship program, and making sure that every shareholder, every Class D, every original shareholder feels connected to Sealaska. And we can do more. We know that. So the concerns that come from these conversations drive us to address those concerns. And we'll highlight some of those more than just the sense of diluted involvement, but the sense of dilution of financial results as well through dividends. And we'll discuss that through this conversation. I do want to highlight that lineal descent did come up in the Class D discussion, because back then, Class D as eligibility maintained the original 1/4 blood quantum requirement that the federal government through the creation of ANCSA put on the Alaska Native corporations. And you'll see just in a couple of quotes, we shouldn't use government standards of blood quantum to dictate our policies. But another voice stated, I like the quarter blood quantum as a starting point, but this younger individual knew that at some point we would have to address this. Populations change, populations grow, we intermarry, blood quantum will become an issue that we have to address at some point. And this individual back in 2004 recognized that. And we highlight that just to highlight that this is a conversation that we believe needs to happen. And as I'm sure our chair, Joe Nelson, will mention, because he's mentioned it many times, there's no better time than now as we've recognized the 50th anniversary of both ANCSA and Sealaska to dive into this important discussion. And I'll pass it on to Joe after my next slide. And this one stood out to me because it really highlights the power of the conversation. It really highlights the power of our shareholder voice. And this was just two descendants talking about, why does it matter if I have 10 shares or 100? Isn't that worth as much as 100 new shares? If you're going to be involved, it doesn't matter how many shares you have. And another shareholder mentioned that it matters in your vote count. It matters in the voice you have within the corporation. And the original shareholder one mentioned, I hadn't thought about that. That does change my mind. And it highlights the fact that as we kick off this discussion, these are exactly the types of conversations we want to occur. It takes conversation, it takes listening, and it takes many voices to help us get to the best decision for our current shareholders and our future shareholders. I'll go ahead and kick it off to our chair, Joe Nelson, at this point, who will lead us into more of the agenda and give us his thoughts on why this is an important conversation at this time.
Thank you, Anthony. Thanks for being here, everybody. My opening comment is that there's no way we can do this justice in a 60-minute Zoom session. So part of the hopeful outcome here is that all who are engaging, obviously something piqued your interest to tune in. You likely have an opinion, and you likely have a strong opinion on the issues. And we do have different mechanisms where we are soliciting feedback and input to have a conversation for a while here beyond the 60 minutes, and then sharing our information back. And that's part of what's going to happen today. We've already heard a number of comments. We've heard comments over many years, but more recently, you've probably noticed the QR code and a survey that the company has out there. So that's the one comment. We're not going to cover it. We can't cover everything in 60 minutes. The other very important message here is just the need for creating a safe space, a healthy place for a conversation. And the issue of blood quantum is inherently divisive, literally divisive. I mean, it's just basic math. It's math when you're dividing. Every single one of us is half our dad, our father, and half our mother. That's dividing something a whole and a half. And we didn't have a say in that. On the flip side of that, we do have a say on our own children, and we want everybody to be able to be a whole person that feels valued. And at the end of the day, there's so many millions of just human beings on this planet, and there's something unique about every one of us, but there's something common about all of us. And it's these commonalities that we wrestle with. And as Native people, we do stand in contrast to much of the Western world in the sense that we have a strong group identity. That's why all of you are tuned in right now, because you have a sense of a group connection and are interested in participating in this conversation. And we do need to acknowledge that these things aren't perfect. It was just 50 years ago that ANCSA passed, less than 50 years ago. And next year, the corporation will be celebrating its 50th anniversary as a company. And corporations are foreign to us still. We're making the best of it. Stock is foreign to us and divisive by nature. You divide your stocks, you have stock splits and all these things, but we can't do that with our corporations. So we can't sell our stock, we can't divide our stock, we can't split it. But as a group, we did amend the original Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act so that we were able to indigenize it and ensure some certainty, some future. The original act, when it passed, was scheduled to last for about 20 years. And then when it hit 1991, we were going to be able to sell our stock. And as soon as the act passed, our leaders at the time acknowledged that's not really what we're looking for here. So we amended the federal act, ANCSA, to allow for shareholders to open up the enrollments. So people didn't have to wait for their parents to die or grandparents to die or wait for a gift. And evidence of the difficulty of this conversation is in the fact that out of our 12 active regional corporations right now, I think it's only six of the corporations that have opened their roles to descendants. So it is a challenging issue to wrestle with, but we as a people are always up to the challenge and looking to do the right thing. And as most of our grandparents would say, if we're doing the right thing, we're looking out for our grandkids. That's what really this is about. It's about our grandkids understanding who they are. And they're not necessarily corporate people, but they are people of the land. And ANCSA is about the land. That's the unique feature when you differentiate us from other people of color. Native people do have that common bond in the sense that our identities are tied to the land. So strongly in most cases, but it's that's where our land is held. So we're stuck with these things. And really, at the end of the day, we are looking for folks to engage, give us, put your input in. And if there are any changes that happen down the road, it's the voice of the shareholders being informed and engaged. The original stock that came out, there was 3 classes. Village corporation stock, Class A, and me, for example, I'm from Yakutat, and I was born right before 1971. So I was fortunate to be enrolled as an original shareholder with Class A stock and also village corporation stock. Class B includes the urban corporations, so Gold Belt and Sealaska. And for shareholders that were just at large, that were not part of the urban or village corporations, they received Class C stock. And all of you know that there was an element of choice back then when folks were enrolling and signing up to the various corporations. There was an element of discretion that happened when you decided where to sign up. It had to be definitely a tie there, but we've always been migrating people in 1970, 71. There were plenty that already were living outside of Alaska at that point. So there's also the 13th regional corporation where some of our people ended up in that one. Go ahead with the next slide, Dixie. I think this is where we're at today. And it was, it took more than 20 years after we amended INCSA before we were able to roll out the Class D stock, the descendant issue to shareholders to vote on. And it took a number of years of conversation just to build the stock package and to take it out and get it on the ballot or the proxy. And that was in 2007 that this package came through, and the elder stock, I think, came a year later, but it was all tied as a package. And right now, our descendant stock and our elder stock and our left out stock, those are all in place because shareholders voted and approved that additional issuance of stock. And at the time, we were addressing, 3 distinct issues: the descendants who were born after 1971, elders who we always value our elders, and the elder stock does not carry doesn't carry additional voting rights. I think there's slides on these. These stocks aren't exactly the same as the original stock. They're unique. The descendant stock, for example, is life estate. It cannot be gifted. It cannot be willed and passed on. The descendant stock comes back to the corporation when descendants pass away. And so the original stock really is different than these other classes. And there are reasons for having that. And one of the, the hottest topic when we talk about stock, it's the dividends. In the Western thinking, it's the distribution, the dividends, and voting power are the 2 key things. And as all of you know, our dividends come from 3 different sources: operations, and every class of stocks benefits from the operations success, and as well as the permanent fund. The permanent fund is probably around 120 million, and we that's solely dedicated to dividends, and that goes to all the classes of stock. The one that is not tied to all the stock, though, is the 7I, which passes through as 7J to the village corporations and to shareholders, and then directly to the at-large shareholders. So that's at large, and the urban shareholders get that directly from the company, and the village corporations get that on behalf of their village shareholders. But the descendants, elders, and left outs don't receive the 7I payments, which come from natural resource revenue sharing from all around the state. Go ahead, Dixie, to the next one. I think this is rolling over to Anthony. Now, I'll wind up my comment here with just I'm looking forward to hearing from Shyla as a strong team member in our shareholder relations. That's kind of what it's all about. We are a shareholder-owned and driven company, and the folks in the shareholder relations department are every day engaging. They're the front lines. So I'm happy that Shyla is able to share with us today, some of the in the weeds details and some of her insights on these issues. But then Penny is a shareholder and been active with our participation committees, and just thrilled that they've been giving their time as participation committees. So I'm looking forward to listening and learning myself, and happy to be here. So thanks for joining, everybody.
Thank you, Joe. We wanted to start kind of the next stage of the conversation just to address what was the number one concern of the Class D stock back in the 2000s. It was dilution. There was many positive reasons for why Class D made sense, and I think we saw that from the original quotes, and we continue to hear it today. But with any concern that is raised by our shareholders, we don't want to minimize it. We want to address it. And so we'll walk through how we addressed the concern around dilution. And Joe just walked through a couple of slides that highlighted that. When it comes to 7J, which is a significant part of the distributions that come from Sealaska, 7J was just left for our original shareholders. that was a big way that we could address the dilution concern for our original shareholders. And the creation of the elder class at that same time was also an avenue to address dilution, as those original shareholders, as they hit the age of 65, would now get this extra 100 shares that provides them additional dividends that offsets the dilution. But the next slide really highlights that dilution is real. From the Class D estimates, it has been less than forecasted though. So in the first 15 years, the Class D estimate for dilution was that there could be an additional almost 12,000 shareholders, new shareholders that would get this 100 shares of Class D stock. The reality has been over 15 years that dilution has been slower, and we've only enrolled 6,300 descendant shareholders within Class D. That may not be the case when we move forward with the lineal descent discussion and more data around potential dilution. But our current estimate is that, there could be upwards of over 10,000 additional shareholders who would become newly eligible under a lineal descent eligibility. And we want to have conversations and hear kind of individual thoughts and hear our shareholder relations teams about what would actual dilution be. In Class D, dilution was less than expected. Is that going to be the same with our lineal descent stocks? Maybe, maybe not. One issue is that for Class D, the blood quantum has always been a difficulty in applying, and maybe by removing that eligibility, enrollment becomes easier and we don't miss potential eligible shareholders within what could be the next change in eligibility moving to lineal descent. So much more conversations to go around dilution, given the fact that we still need to address that and want to address that. But as we move to the next slide, we highlight the actual per 100 share dividend to all shareholder classes from operations and permanent funds. So this doesn't include the 7J portion. And we see that dilution is real. After 15 years, with Class D shares, shareholders received $766 in 2021. If there was no Class D shares, they would have received $1,000. But we also see two additional unique factors. One is dilution was fairly slow. It takes time to build towards greater dilution. So this is a 15-year time period. And we're just seeing greater dilution now, close to 30%. But again, it took time. And another important factor is that we see increasing dividends, even though we have increasing dilution. And that's an important concept. The fact that through stronger financial results, we have the opportunity to alleviate dilution concerns. And as if you've highlighted or watched any of our management updates, our annual reports, our annual meeting, we constantly stress the fact that we are looking to improve our operations and continually grow, and that should offset dilution, which it has from the original Class D stock. If we go to the next page, a benefit slide that highlights that it's not all about dividends either. Our shareholder voices lead us to increase shareholder programming in many other areas. And in 2020 and 2021, we are close to 30 million in shareholder benefits. Dividends are the largest part, just under 20 million in dividends provided to shareholders, but many other great benefits provided. And the next page just highlights that this ability to increase shareholder benefits comes from increased income. And we want to keep that going. That is what we work on at Sealaska constantly. If we go to the next slide, Dixie, it just highlights that we have a strong trend. It's not going to be up every single year. We may see some declines, but over a long history, we want this increasing financial benefit to continue to grow, to not only provide greater dividends, but provide greater overall benefits to our shareholders. I believe if there's the next slide, next slide leads us to passing it over to the conversation that Joe was excited about, hearing from broader voices than just Joe and I, and getting some real information that ties into this discussion from our shareholder relations team. And I'll kick it over to Shyla for an introduction and a kickoff for your next section. Cheesh.
Thank you, Anthony. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Shyla Germain. I work in the Shareholder Relations Department. So I'm firsthand with a lot of, most all shareholders who need something, who have a, who want to have a voice be heard. That's basically what I strive for in this department is hearing what our shareholders have to say, and being in charge of enrollment. I see firsthand, the people who come and apply and the troubles that they have obtaining their certificate of Indian blood, only to walk into, Sealaska and be denied by myself because they're less than a quarter blood quantum, and we can't accept them for the reason of ANSCA, the way that it was created when it was created. So the time has come now, for change to happen, and I'm an advocate for change. So I'm really excited for this to happen and to be a part of it. So in 2018, after being in the Shareholder Relations Department for approximately 2 years, one of the things that I heard most about, from shareholders who were enrolling was the difficulty that they experienced trying to enroll. At that time, we required original documents to be mailed. We required a printed out paper application that had to be notarized. And so it just caused a lot of roadblocks for our kids who were trying, who are freshly 18 trying to enroll. And so we made the decision to transition to, after hearing all the negative comments and the difficulties that people went through, to transition to 100% online enrollment. We dropped the notarization requirement, and you no longer have to send in your full identity, which would be it would have been your original certificate of Indian blood. You would have had to send in your original birth certificate. And so now it's 100% done online. It takes about 10 minutes. And all you need to do is take a photo of those documents that we require and upload those documents. So another point is that it's done for security reasons. I personally wouldn't want my full identity with my birth certificate, my social security, my signature traveling through the mail. So again, it's all online, which sometimes causes, problems for shareholders who are in villages who don't have access to the internet. But we are always more than willing to assist them in any way to get them enrolled if they don't have access to the internet. So our team is always available to help enroll in enrollment application. Let's see here. What we need to enroll nowadays is your certificate of Indian blood, or we recently, that was another thing that we heard from our descendants trying to enroll, was that obtaining a certificate of Indian blood was a challenge. Another reason because of that is because they do still require an original birth certificate to be sent, or you can call and make an in-person meeting. With any of the Alaska regional offices. So Anchorage has an office, Juneau has an office. Due to COVID, I believe they're not open right now, but if you call ahead of time, somebody will meet you at the Juneau office to take your application if you don't want to send your birth certificate through the mail. The other thing that we heard is a lot was, why can't we use our tribal ID cards? We recently expanded it to accept tribal ID cards, but we want shareholders and descendants to know that if they use their tribal ID card and it's not inclusive of all their Alaska Native blood, it's only inclusive of their Tlingit or Haida blood. So if it's under the quarter, they most likely will be denied unless they go out and get a certificate of Indian blood that shows all of their Alaska Native, which would then possibly put them over the quarter mark. So if next we'll talk about the barriers that kind of leads into it. Some of the things that shareholders might run into, they don't meet the quarter blood quantum. Obviously, that's the most significant blockage to having descendants be a part of our corporation. If they were adopted, if they're adopted, we're going to require a few more pieces of documentation to support that, and that'll be determined by the questionnaire that they answer in the beginning part of the application. Another reason would be that they're estranged from their family. Some people, have lost contact of their birth parent, one of their birth parents since birth. They do not know their parent's birth date. They don't know the last four of their SSN, which are two of the requirements that we require in the questionnaire portion of the application, so that we can make sure that we're connecting you to the correct lineal shareholder. Another reason would be that they can't afford to have an original birth certificate. Now, if they've had a copy made, we can accept a copy as long as it's a certified, legit copy. Another reason is that they're sometimes the father is not listed on the birth certificate. And then sometimes it's added later on. And if that's the case, we do require a paternity test, a DNA paternity test with one of the father's direct relations. And that percentage has to come back as 99.9%. And once you get that percentage, you can actually go to vital statistics and prove that DNA test, the paternity test, and they will add the father to the birth certificate. At that point, they can come to Sealaska and use that birth certificate to enroll under that lineal shareholder. And I think that's about it. We will be handing it off to our chair, SPC, who represents outside of Southeast, and that's Penny Gage.
Thank you, Shyla. I see your little one peeking out there. We have one of the newest,
right now.
newest Sealaska family members here.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I'm not sure if the echo's on my end. There we go. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Tlingit chena kosia aya aksai bleitka chena penny yuchat duasak tlanerina chatsiti bleitka yari ayachat shitka kwan awayuchan Anchorage yechat yati gunachish. My Tlingit name is Kwasia and my English name is Penny Gage. My parents are Amelia and Steve Gage. I grew up in Pelican and Sitka, and I currently live in Anchorage on Dena'ina lands. My mother's family is Tlingit from the Raven Dog Salmon clan, Japanese and Caucasian, and my father's family is white from Western Europe. As Shyla mentioned, I chair the Other Alaska Shareholder Participation Committee. So it's a committee for those of us that live in Alaska outside of Southeast, and we help represent the shareholder perspective. We meet several times a year and help communicate to Sealaska staff and board what our personal thoughts are, those of shareholders we interact with. And other members of my committee for Other Alaska are Alvin Dooner Edenshaw, Carissa Demmert, Shirley Kendall, and Laura Revels. So I was gifted original stock from my grandmother, Amelia Keto, and I'm proud to be Tlingit, a Sitka Tribe of Alaska member, a member of Tlingit and Haida Central Council, and a Sealaska shareholder, of course. I don't have a village corporation since my family lived in Petersburg, and when ANCSA passed, it was one of those communities that was left out of the act. And I'm really excited to share some of the thoughts in a few moments that many of you wrote and shared with Sealaska about blood quantum, because this issue is one that I've thought a lot about in my own life and my own family, as my family mixes with Japanese, Caucasian, and other races. And I've thought a lot about what it means for our corporation. What will Sealaska and our native cultures look like in 50, 100, 500 years? We come from people who have been around for thousands of years. And so thinking about what that future looks like, we're thinking on a really big time horizon. This discussion requires us to think multiple generations into the future. And then also on a personal note, I'm expecting my first child in January, and I wonder what her life will be like. And I want to do all I can to make sure she knows where she comes from and the multiple components that will make her up, so she can be proud and knowledgeable about it and continue our ways of life. And something I've realized through being pregnant with a girl that I think is interesting to share is that the seeds of the next generation, that is specifically the millions of eggs inside of my new daughter that will mature later in her life, have been formed already. So the beginnings of my grandchildren, if she chooses to have children, are already inside of me. So what a powerful way to think about how we're connected to future generations from such an early stage, from almost conception. So it's been making me think about this conversation of bloodlines, family, and connections. And as Joe, excuse me, as Joe mentioned, the question of eligibility has been an ongoing conversation for many years for Sealaska and many of us. I know we have people who are not shareholders of Sealaska or come from other regions tuning in today. Sealaska has and is soliciting input on the issue of blood quantum in a variety of ways. And the quotes I'm about to share on these slides are taken from a 2018 Sealaska shareholder survey and from an informal questionnaire that was distributed about a month ago seeking input from shareholders around this issue. So we're going to share some of these quotes anonymously. Feedback falls in some general categories that both support change and some opposition to change. So we'll share those general categories and some sample comments from each. And feel free to comment respectfully in the chat as you listen or ask your questions, and look for a link at the end of this event to submit your own input if you haven't already. And we'll address questions at the end if we have time. And if there isn't, Sealaska will try and address your questions through future social media posts or online, or reach out to you if appropriate. Okay, so the first category is around support, so around basic fairness and administrative issues. On slide 17. So the next slide, we're going to share some of the comments. So comments here center on how clerical errors and poor record keeping can have generational impacts when blood quantum is a factor. Many people talk about how a parent or grandparent's blood quantum was incorrectly recorded by the government at some point, and the impacts that that has on us all. And it's nearly impossible to get these records corrected. You can go to the next slide there. Yeah. Record keeping also impacts those who have been adopted and those whose paternity is not recorded, as Shyla mentioned. And others point out that they should not be held responsible for their parents' choice in love and relationships. So the next category, also in support, would be because blood quantum is a flawed colonial construct. People who hold this view, the next slide, frequently point out that natives are the only race who are required to document their heritage in this way, and that requiring a minimum amount of native blood was a way for the US government to extinguish its treaty obligations more quickly and take our land, and that natives should not be using a Western or outside notion like blood quantum against one another. Others point out that historically tribal membership had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with relationships with family and land, contributions to your community, and adherence to shared values. Slide 21, a category of support for the future and to keep young people engaged. Next slide. Some of the comments in this category are, with each generation, blood quantum levels will decline, and if in time, few will meet the quarter threshold. Or other folks voiced that to ensure the stability of Sealaska for generations to come, our young people need to feel connected and engaged to our community and culture. And connecting people to Sealaska and programs offered through Sealaska Heritage Institute can help perpetuate values and cultural knowledge in younger generations. Next slide is in the category of opposition. So the comments I'll share in a moment center around avoiding the dilution of stock, benefits, and native ownership in Sealaska. So people who express this concern are worried that dividends and other shareholder benefits will decline with the addition of new shareholders. They might be concerned about what a reduction of benefits will mean for someone they care about, not just themselves. And some also worry that one day Sealaska will be controlled by people who are not real natives. And then the next category is also in opposition, thinking of, that higher blood quantum indicates someone is more connected to their culture. Next slide. So people who express this view are often concerned that people with lower blood quantum aren't the same as those with a higher blood quantum, that they are less knowledgeable or committed to traditional values. And then the last category is of opposition as well. Descendants can get their stock through gifting and inheritance. So people who express this view say there's already a system in place for bringing new shareholders into the company, gifting and inheritance of original shares. So I'll let you guys read through them. There's some wonderful comments. Gunal Chish for your comments. Feel free to type questions and comments in the chat. And thank you for listening to the thoughts shared by your fellow community members. And for those of you who are shareholders, you'll be receiving a survey on this topic in November. So keep an eye out on your email to keep contributing your thoughts. And there's one question that came in. This is a question from Barbara Belk. And this is a question for Anthony. I assume it's Belk. I wanted to say Barbara Blake, but maybe it's Belk. I'm reading it. I'm not reading it from where it was typed. So this is a question for Anthony. What is being done to specifically address barriers for Tsimshians from Metlakatla who literally cannot get a certificate of Indian blood because the BIA and Metlakatla do not track blood quantum? Why aren't we included in this conversation to a greater extent? From Barbara Belk.
Yes, thank you for the question. We have an appeal process. So if anybody has issue with their blood quantum as expressed on the certificate of Indian blood, they can appeal to Sealaska, and you can send that appeal to myself, our chair, our corporate secretary, or our head of policy and legal affairs, Jaylene Kukesh. And you know, any call to Sealaska can get you through to that appeal process. But that is the avenue for Tsimshians who are not enrolled with Metlakatla Indian community because you can't be both. So I believe that Metlakatla makes certain that you are not a Sealaska shareholder when you do apply. You can't be both, but you can have a choice. So if you live outside of Metlakatla and you are Tsimshian, and we have many Tsimshian shareholders, and you are struggling to get your BIA, the best avenue is to reach directly to Sealaska, go through our appeal process. You know, we've gone to Congress for changes. We've gone to Congress for pushing the BIA themselves to address the issues that we put forward. So we really do look to address the issues with the CIB card, and especially in this case when you know, both entities, the tribe and the BIA, are not offering you the information required. We're going to have to go through different processes to support you. So an appeal process is the way that we would do that.
Thank you. Another question from Randy Johnson. So if my children have children, they will be 1/8 Tlingit and 1/8 Tsimshian. Would they qualify for Sealaska membership? This question is for Shyla, probably.
Hello.
Sorry, I should have warned you so you could come off camera and
No,
get ready.
I don't know if I can make my video start. It says somebody stopped it, but that's a great question. Thank you for asking. And the answer for that is no. So they have to be a quarter or more Alaska Native. And that's something that's near and dear to my heart, is working in shareholder relations and kind of enrollment. My children are not able to be enrolled, and that's quite hard. You know, I feel like I do everything that I can for shareholders, for our people. I want everybody to be able to be a part of the corporation, and for my children to not be involved, or, you know, not have the option to be involved, is very disheartening. So that's kind of why I stand where I stand and am an advocate for change.
I will highlight though that if you are an 8th Tlingit and an 8th Tsimshian recognized as an Alaska Native Tsimshian, then the combination would put you over a quarter. And so, you know, we have many shareholders who may be an 8th Tlingit and an 8th Aleut, or an 8th Tlingit and 8th Athabaskan, and they have the opportunity through the combination of Alaska Native blood to qualify. The issue would be if you are Canadian First Nations, then that is the issue that Shyla would highlight there. But these conversations often, or these questions often, don't have simple answers. So reaching out to the shareholder relations team, Shyla and Vanessa, is often your best choice.
Thank you. Another question from Arlene Diltz for Anthony. Why does Sealaska rely on the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the BIA, to validate blood quantum rather than using Tlingit and Haida Central Council, which, to my knowledge, tribal membership is based on lineal descent. If you can prove who your family is and that they were Native, there's no blood quantum requirement for Central Council.
But the first part of the question is why, is because that was spelled out for us in original ANCSA to utilize the CIB cards for eligibility. We've heard from many shareholders like you, Arlene, that it would be better and easier to utilize TNH cards if your TNH card indicates greater than a quarter blood quantum, and we are now allowing that. So I believe Vanessa and Shyla highlighted that for us, and that was from many questions from shareholders about having it be easier if we did allow TNH cards. So we are allowing that now, and so please, again, reach out with any questions. Shyla did highlight one issue. It is possible that your TNH card indicates less than a quarter blood quantum because they don't add other Alaska Native blood. So you could be 1/8 Tlingit and 1/8 Athabascan, your TNH card would say only 1/8 blood, you'd have to go back and get your CIB to provide the full 1/4 blood quantum that you would have if you added other Alaska Native blood to that. So that's the only issue with it, but it is a great step to be able to utilize your TNH card.
Thank you. So we're almost at the top of the hour. I'm going to turn it back over to Joe to wrap us up. But Gunalchish for the opportunity to share some of the thoughts that all of you submitted. And again, for shareholders, you'll be receiving a survey in November to give more thoughts on this topic. So just keep those thoughts and ideas coming, and look forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Penny, for helping and for being so engaged, and thank everybody for being here. But a couple things to clarify just about the blood quantum issue, because I see something new in the chat about quarter blood to vote, and you don't need to be a quarter blood to vote. You don't even need to be a quarter blood to serve on the board. It's you just need to have the lineal descents and a voting share. So the way, because descendants, the way that was built in 2007 was to require the 1/4 blood. Folks that aren't at that quarter blood threshold, we have quite a few thousand that have received shares through inheritance or by gift, original shares, and they're able to, those are voting full-fledged stock. They can serve on the board, and they get all the benefits as a shareholder does, as an original shareholder. And then just maybe if folks are, well, I guess I can't get permission from you right now, but I'm going to do it anyway. You know, this is my CIB, and I probably showed too much, and you shouldn't do that because of all the privacy issues or whatever. But it is a hassle, and the one of the big challenges is not just the administrative bureaucracy. It's, you know, the fact that it was a colonial construct that was designed to really dilute us as a people until we were fully assimilated. And the power to shift that came in a self-determination era when we had to amend ICSA to allow us to kind of take control back of our own destiny here. And the hours, the big hour, it's all of us collectively. We are diverse. We have shareholders in all 50 states and in many countries. These identity issues are complex. They're unique to all of us. And, you know, the BIA has some, and we get to know them by name over the years, all of us, because I think they've served for a lot of years, punching these cards out. And mine is an example. It says 3/4 Indian. And my Clinton Haida card is like half or a quarter or something like that. But my dad's Yak, so it only captures my mom from the Clinton Haida side. And these are, they only go one way is the other point, you know, as far as the way basic math happens. And as far as the company is concerned, on a lot of these issues, as we've shown, we have some history with the 2007 enrollment. We're looking forward to sharing more data, looking forward to engaging more. And we've been growing and changing as a company, and looking forward to the next 100 years as we look at our 50th anniversary. And we'll hope that all of you will look that far down the road with us and fill out these surveys and engage. And I see Anthony tune in to capture something else, but I want to say this is just, it's a moment in a conversation that we're going to be having for a while here, and really appreciate all of you early engagers. So thank you for joining us today, and feel free to follow up with Shyla, the Shareholder Relations team, or anybody else.
Thank you. I just wanted to highlight that it is helpful to hear from you in regards to what additional voices you want to hear. I think the voice of our tribes is something that's critically important. Our tribes already follow lineal descent, and there's a reason that they do that, and it's a very powerful reason why they follow lineal descent. And it's based on the fact that blood quantum does not define a tribal citizen. And so that is a voice that we plan to bring into this conversation. And if you have any other voices that you believe need to be heard from our shareholder base, please add that to your comments, and we'll make sure that we add as many voices as we can to this conversation. But like Joe, I really appreciate Penny and Vanessa and Shyla joining their voice to this conversation.